Bar coming up the middle, free safety, gotta get it go. Allen steps up, jumps over the defenders to pick up the first. Decide not to use a Curry, way downtown,
What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Zach, and welcome back to the Playbook. I got two special guests with me here today. First off, my good friend from the United States Marine Corps, Zach. How's it going, man?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
And a special guest here from PayYourDuesPodcast, the host and creator, Ash. How's it going, man?
Hey, Zach. Thanks for having me on here. I'm very happy to be here.
I'm glad to hear that. And today we're going to get into all of Week 1 college football. I hope you enjoyed, and let's get right into it. And I want to talk about just the upset disasters some teams had close to the goal line, missed kick, whatever. How do y'all feel about them games, them tight games that should have been won, should have been lost?
The first one that jumps off is there's two games. I'll just talk about one, but the App State UNC game, that one was crazy. It's so many points that were scored. It was almost like a Big 12 game. App State, I wouldn't call it an upset because they were favored close, but they're so close to pulling it off, but UNC,
Okay. And Ash, what game really got you in the heartstrings?
I'll be honest, like the one that just really stuck with me was last night on Sunday. I watched that Florida State LSU game with people who were Florida State alumni. So I was getting hyped with them. I just know that depending on how my favorite team plays this year, I may or may not be adopting the Florida State Seminoles for the 2022 season. Just because you look at the way that the last 2 minutes of that game was just complete. It's going to go down as one of the best games of this season, if not of the last few years, maybe even the last decade or so, because you have FSU has the ball. They're up by a full 7 points. They punt it over to the LSU Tigers. The guy muffs the punt, and FSU has the ball within the 10-yard line. And then 2 plays later, they fumble it at the 1-yard line, and then LSU gets it back. Then they march down the field. They get a guy out of bounds with 1 second left. They get the touchdown. Then the extra point gets blocked. It's just absolute insanity. College football is back.
College football is back indeed. And you almost had a top 15 upset with this game, ECU versus NC State. That kicker, no love this week. You can't blame for the first one. Laces were in. Every holder should know laces out. You're good. Could have tied the game. Everyone, it's over. They're going to run the clock out, do whatever. Interception, 20-yard return for it, and then they drive into 35 yards to the field goal, and then all of a sudden, shank right. So it was just a heartbreak for a team that could have used that big win in that time. And then speaking about the FSU-LSU game, I'm happy LSU lost because, Alabama fan. But you hate to see that just from a college football perspective because, y'all had plays go y'all's way and you couldn't capitalize at the time. But speaking about FSU, let's get into that dirty ACC conference and where it looks somewhat of a 3-team race right now between the big boys, Clemson, FSU, and Miami. How do you feel about that one, Ash?
Absolutely. I mean, I know that right now FSU's not ranked. Miami's ranked number, 17 or somewhere in that area. They're somewhere between 10 and 20. So depending on how, of course, once we get into the conference play, that's the real factor. But it's looking like the Florida State-Miami game is going to have high stakes in the ACC this year. Possibly, depending on if both teams are the real deal or not, they may rematch in that ACC championship game. Of course, Clemson has that high 4-seed ranking right now. So if they're going to live up to what Dabo's been doing the last few years, up until, of course, last year he kind of took a step back. But if he can keep it going for what he's been doing, you're going to have a serious ACC matchup when you have Clemson going down to Florida State in a few weeks.
Oh, you should. You should. Soper, how you feel about your conference in the ACC?
I'm not ready to say Clemson's going to be this group of guys. You know, it just really hasn't. It just really hasn't translated. And they lost Brent Venables, their defensive coordinator. That's going to be big for their defense because Clemson they haven't really been known for their defense, but it's been solid. Their defense has been consistent, and without that knowledge there, it's going to be hard to replicate. FSU looked promising. Jordan Travis definitely has taken some steps as a quarterback to solidify himself in that starting position. But Miami, they're the real. I think they're the belle of the ball this year for the ACC. Mario Cristobal coming down from Oregon, bringing his recruiting prowess and just his tough coaching to a team that really needs it. Honestly, like Miami, they haven't been a tough team the past few years. Probably longer than that, or probably 10, 15 years now.
Since 2001.
Yeah, Miami hasn't really been a tough football team. I think Mario Cristobal could be the guy that returns that, and if the U comes back, I think the ACC gets real interesting.
So
Absolutely.
my take on the ACC is you got that 3-team race. I believe the Seminoles are going to triumph out of that 3. I think they beat Miami. I think they beat Clemson. I think they run away with it. They showed me not too much, but enough toughness. Because that LSU game wasn't a game of skill. That was a game of who wants it more and who's going to take it. Clemson, right now, they're playing Georgia Tech. Don't know the score. I don't have the score with me at the moment. And then Miami, they didn't really have a challenge when they played their game. So the only one that's battle-tested, in my opinion, right now, I know this is way early, but I think FSU, if they continue making improvements on their game, that they're going to come out being the top dog in the ACC. Now let's talk about their older, stronger, bigger brother in the SEC, which it looks like as of right now could be a 3 to 4 man race, 2 in each division between Alabama and Texas A&M and Florida and Georgia with a couple of dark horses. Zach, let's start this off with you. How do you think the SEC did and will shake down after week 1?
I'm very disappointed in you. You're not mentioning Arkansas. Like Arkansas, they're really. You just talked about Florida State battle test. Arkansas, they put away a very scrappy Cincinnati. Cincinnati lost Desmond Ritter, Jerome Ford, years. But I mean, Luke Fickle's back. Luke Fickle's a coach. Their defense looks stout still, but I mean, Arkansas, they just look like the physically superior and more talented team with KJ Jefferson at quarterback, who he looks like he could make some noise. And I mean, you put Texas A&M up there, and I don't see it with Jimbo and Texas A&M. Honestly,
They made too much noise against Alabama on the offseason.
Yeah, I don't see it. I think Alabama's going to put it on them this year when they play just because of that.
What about you, Ash? I know you're not the biggest SEC guy, but you know good football when you see it.
Yeah, so I mean those top 5 rankings, you have Georgia and Alabama came out and they solidified their ranking in the top 5. We of course need to see the rest of the season to see if they're going to be perfect or where they fall when their imperfections are going to come across. But I think one of the biggest things that stands out for the SEC of this week 1 was you see the Florida Gators take down the Pac-12's top contender team, the Utah Utes. So, I mean, Utah, of course, if they're the real deal, may be able to come back and have a successful season. But the fact that the Florida Gators are taking an unranked team that they have, new head coach with Billy Napier, and the Utah Utes have been a team that's been contending for the Pac-12, if not the playoffs, the last, I want to say, 5 years or so. So, I mean, that's a statement right there, just the fact that they were able to pull off that upset. I believe the spread was 2.5 points towards Utah, so take that spread and flip it towards Florida. That's how the game went.
Yes, sir. And no one's showing love to the rest of the SEC, so I will. You got basically the little brother of the SEC, Vanderbilt, getting it done against Hawaii. You have Kentucky. Before LSU lost to FSU, which ain't a thing to hang your hat on so far, the SEC was 14-0 against other opponents. So the SEC looking like the dominant force in college football right now. We'll see who falls off that strength wagon and who stays on when conference play does come about. Now, getting into possibly the biggest competition to the SEC for the best conference in college football right now, I'm going to let Ash start this off about the Big Ten.
So with the Big Ten this last weekend, we didn't really see any upsets for Big Ten teams. I mean, there were some that maybe you had higher expectations out of them. Iowa, but for the most part, every game did go the way it was intended to. I think actually the Indiana beating Illinois was really the only one that was surprising. But I mean, the Big Ten's coming out with a pretty strong showing, just like the SEC so far. The only losses that the Big Ten has so far in the season are to other Big Ten teams. You have Northwestern beating Nebraska back in week 0 last week, and then that Illinois loss that I just mentioned, and as well as also Penn State and Purdue. If you guys got the chance to watch that game last Thursday, that was definitely a solid contender of a game to watch. Of course, that Pittsburgh and West Virginia game may have stolen the show a little bit, but this was definitely a good one for it. But I mean, the Iowa Hawkeyes are just exactly where you expect them to be. The defense is back, stronger than they were last year possibly, and the offense is also back, same as last year, maybe a little bit weaker too. But then you also have Rutgers pulling off the win against Boston College. That was the most surprising thing we probably saw of the week.
Yes, sir. How about you, Zach? I know you're an ACC guy, and your alumnus Notre Dame got beat by a Big Ten.
Notre Dame, I mean, they fought hard. They fought real hard against Ohio State. Ohio State just grinded them out, which I mean, to be fair, I thought Ohio State was going to blow the wheels off of them because it's Notre Dame. But I mean, they fought like that. That was a very tough and gutsy performance by them. It looked like they were going to be able to hold them off, but those adjustments that Coach Day made in the second half and into the fourth quarter, they grinded them out and they got a very tough win. I'm interested to see on how Ohio State does the rest of their season. I mean, you still have Michigan, who can be a potential thorn in their side. You got some quarterback stuff that they're trying to figure out. Is it going to be McNamara or is it going to be the other kid? But we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But Big Ten, they look good. Definitely second best conference in the FBS, no doubt.
I think Michigan is really the only Big Ten team that came out with a super dominant win against Colorado State, 51-7. I mean, well, also Wisconsin, Illinois State, 38-0. But you had like those SEC teams that we were talking about, how you have Georgia beating Oregon 49-3, and then you have Alabama beating Utah State 55-0. Like, you're not really seeing too much of that within the Big Ten. As I said, there's a couple that were complete blowouts, but for the most part, a lot of these games were relatively close. So I mean, it's hard to tell like exactly at this point in the season if the Big Ten is going to be able to compete with the SEC, but it is looking like the Big Ten is still going to be like the tough conference it is, where a win's a win regardless of how much it's by.
Yeah, especially in Iowa's case, the only team in the last 25 years to get 7 points without a touchdown and win the game. And I know we talked about this on your podcast a little. I still believe that Iowa is the dark horse in that division. You have them pretty names, Michigan, Ohio State. But at the end of the day, I think toughness in the Big Ten this year is going to go far, because Ohio State, even though they got the win in Notre Dame, it wasn't a pretty game for them. They looked off sync in some plays. First half, you were just like, this ain't the Ohio State team I remember that's going 400 or 500 yards a game against other teams and making it look easy. C.J. Stroud didn't win any Heisman points from that performance. And with Michigan, they do have that quarterback controversy. And they also have that back controversy with Harbaugh, who's rumored, not heavily rumored, but rumored to be looking to go back into the NFL again. So I don't feel like Michigan, whoever wins against Michigan, Ohio State, good for them. But I feel like Iowa is going to push past their, like, hey, we're Iowa. We're not top tier yet, but we'll be there. And they get to that point this year. And I just believe the Big Ten had good showings from their top teams, but it's overshadowed by the SEC just blowing the doors off of everyone and anyone they saw this week, besides Florida beating Utah. And now, speaking about blowing, It is the Big 12 we're talking about, who's just blown their whole image away, basically, from a power conference to we can still beat the Pac-12. Ash, how you feel about them old Big 12 guys?
I mean, the Big 12, they had the matchup West Virginia, Pittsburgh. The Big 12 fell in that one, only by one score, but they did fall.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, TCU was able to pull off the win against Colorado, which conference to conference, that's a big one. But I mean, besides that, you look at the rest of the Big 12, the matchups, they're not any big name matchups that really can tell you a whole lot about where they stand relative to any other Power 5 conference. As I said, you have just those two games against other teams where, I mean, I think Pittsburgh's going to take a step back this year than where they were at last year. Colorado, they're Colorado. Like, you don't really have super high expectations for them. So as of right now, like the Big 12, you can't compare them, but I would say that just based on how it's looking so far, it's looking like they're going to be a very middle of the pack team.
A middle of the road division. And what about you there?
I can't really argue with anything Ash said there. It's kind of one of those things. They're in a weird spot as a conference. They're losing Texas and Oklahoma, and they're bringing in Houston and Cincinnati to the fold. I think there are some quality teams in big picture, Big 12, but I think ultimately the conference is to the could be wrong. Brett Venables light fire into that Oklahoma team, make them play some real good defense. Because we know the Big 12, they're coming with offense. But I mean, maybe they can make a shot at it. But I think New Year's Six bowls are for teams like Oklahoma State, and Baylor. They'll be fighting for those spots.
Yeah, I do agree with the Big 12. Their hope isn't playoff bound. It's New Year's Six bowl or bust. Because, let's be honest, once Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma, their expectations took a little hit because he took their quarterback. Spencer Rattler left, who was supposed to be the guy last year. Didn't look strong in his starting performance at South Carolina. And then you got Baylor, Oklahoma State, known to be them teams that are like, hey, we're here, but we're not pushing for anything bigger than January 1st, December 31st type deal. I just feel like the Big 12 is just in a weird predicament. Like, hey, we're about to lose these big names. Either shut up or put up, or we're going to end up looking like the Mountain West,
right?
MAC division type deal.
The Big 12, I agree with what Zach said, that the Big 12's goal should be to get one, if not two teams into the New Year's Six bowls. Is it possible for them to get someone in the playoffs? Yes. Is it probable? I wouldn't really say so. I mean, you really just have to have either like Oklahoma or Texas or even Oklahoma State or like Baylor just come out of nowhere and just run house and then make it. I mean, I know last year, like the Big 12 championship, Baylor, Oklahoma State was one that's those two teams are not expected to be the championship matchup. So, I mean, the Big 12 sometimes is one of those conferences where a team comes out of nowhere and just does exceptionally well. I mean, the way TCU beat Colorado, what if Colorado ends up being a decent team, TCU's even better, and then TCU ends up being a top 5 team? Who knows? I mean, it's all just really so early to tell. But I mean, yeah, the Big 12 as of right now, I would say you're not looking at playoff material, but you are looking at maybe a couple top 10 finishes.
Yes, sir. And now a conference that's kind of been left for dead, not really with some of the teams, but the Pac-12. Soper, how you feel about from yesteryear to now, how the Pac-12 shakes out?
The Pac-12, man. I mean, they really had chances to show that, hey, we're still here. Utah going on the road to the swamp.
Yeah,
they played admirably, but you lost. You can split hair. You're ranked number 7. Lost to an unranked. Started Georgia. They look outmatched. Bo Nix is still Bo Nix. And it just wasn't the Pac-12. Their only hope at undefeated conference champion really is USC. But I mean, as we know, the Pac-12 is one of those conferences where they beat up on each other all season. Like once they get to the fold of things, you have a team like Stanford pulls a upset. They win like 5-6 games, but hey, they're going to beat the number 5 team. So it's just one of those things. It's not looking good for them, big picture wise.
Yeah. What's your thoughts about him, Ash?
I do like that comment about Bo Nix is still Bo Nix. It just goes to show that transferring schools doesn't fix your problems. But I will say that USC definitely is like the most contending program in the Big 12 as the current standings. I mean, Oregon State had a pretty good win against Boise State. Arizona State beats, who was that? I just lost it. Oh, Northern Arizona by 40-3. That's a big one. And then, of course, like, as I said, Colorado lost to TCU. So a lot of this, I'm not really too impressed by it just because, like, the two top programs, Utah and Oregon, came out and just Utah barely lost, and then Oregon gets their ass kicked. Like last year, an entire year ago, you have Oregon that was in a similar ranking. They went into number 3 ranked Ohio State and just shocked the entire college football world with the huge upset. And then this year, you're thinking the game against Georgia is a similar opportunity to do that, and then they just fall short and completely short of it. 46-point spread. That's embarrassing, to be honest, for them.
It is embarrassing, and I feel like later in the road we're going to give some predictions for week 2 that might shake things up a little bit more. But the Pac-12 really laid a goose egg. They showed that they're the worst conference in the Power 5 with possibly their number 1 and 2 teams. They're like, hey, this is our playoff teams. Go show them why we're playoff contenders. Oregon, I don't even know if they were playing football, but they showed up to a glorified home game with Georgia and got demolished. And then you got Utah, who fought valiantly in the swamp with swamp-like conditions, throwing up everywhere. Their defense cracked at the wrong time and let AR-15 stroll on in for the game-winning touchdown. And I just feel like the Pac-12 just kind of showed like, we're out of the Chip Kelly, USC Reggie Bush days where the Pac-12 is the Pac-12 to like, hey, we might be going out of that. Thank God for this 12-team playoffs coming up so we can actually get someone in. But at the end of the day, USC is their biggest chance to make it. Do I see them coming out unscathed? No, because USC has always shown they lose that one game and then it's over for them. Their program falls apart. 2 years later, they hire a new head coach thinking it'll fix their problem.
I mean, if anything for the Pac-12, you might have it seemed like Washington that comes out, and because I know Washington used to be like another program that would finish like in the top 8, another team that's made the playoffs previously. It's possible they could have a good season and then make it there as well, but just on the way that everything's looking right now, USC is definitely going to be the Pac-12's best chance at making a New Year's 6 or if not the playoffs.
So speaking about making chances and all that, I'm a big fan of early predictions. Too early to even say, probably put my foot in my mouth. But I want to talk about your top 4 playoff teams after week 1 and why they proved it to you. Soper, you want to start that off?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to go against Alabama, Georgia at the top spots. I mean, Alabama, they look dominant. Granted, is against Utah State, who outmatched. But, I mean, they did what they were supposed to do. And that sometimes that says a lot. When it comes to college football, they did what they're supposed to do. They even shut them out. So I mean, that's good. Second, I go with Georgia. I mean, Georgia, they had a very impressive performance against Oregon. Just absolutely just beat the wheels off. People were expecting Georgia to take a big step back because they lost so much in the NFL draft. But I mean, that defense is pretty much plug and play at this point. Hey, next guy step up. And he's good.
Reload. Yeah. It's reload
Kirby
season.
Smart's really doing his thing. Georgia. Number 3. I'm gonna say Ohio State right now, just because I think Ohio State's gonna come out of the Big Ten, maybe with a loss. I don't see them running the table, but I definitely think Ohio State's gonna come out and they're gonna get that 3rd spot just because they've got too much offensive firepower. I just think they're going to overwhelm some teams in that conference. And then at 4, I'm actually going to go with the team that Ohio State just beat and say Notre Dame because, I mean, Notre Dame, we all know that they always find a way to weasel their way into that, like into those talks. And I think they have a pretty decent schedule coming up. They've got USC later on down the line. Who, I mean, if USC looks good, that's a good quality. That the Ohio State game was so close for as long as it was, I think that might actually work in Notre Dame's favor down the line. This is a really good loss on the road. And they hung with them. And I think that'll help Notre Dame's cause at the end of it.
So you're seeing possibly 2 rematches happening in the playoffs this year.
No, it'll be Alabama, Notre Dame, and then Georgia, Ohio State. The way I got it.
Mm-hmm. But
the possible national championship rematch.
Possible national championship match, definitely.
Okay. I'm down for that. Ash, I want to hear some strong hot takes out here.
To be honest, I don't know what hot takes I have for you. I mean, the top 4 right now is all looking pretty accurate. I mean, you have number 1, number 3, Alabama and Georgia. The way they came out and just played today, they definitely deserve those spots in the top 5 at minimum. And then, I mean, Notre Dame with the loss. I don't know if I want to necessarily agree to say that they'll have a complete bounce back with the rest of the season. I definitely think the way that they held Ohio State and were in control that first half, I think they're definitely going to end up in the top 10, but I don't know if I want to say they're going to end up in that top 4. I would still say Alabama the number 1 team just because of they have their Heisman quarterback who's returned, and they have a lot of people that are still going to be developing on the team there as well. Number 2, I mean, Ohio State, the way that they rebounded that second half against Notre Dame to come back and win. And then the way that CJ Stroud was playing last year, he wasn't playing super well this week, but I definitely could see him also making improvements, possibly even being the Heisman winner this year. So I'll keep Ohio State at number 2. Number 3, Georgia, just for the same reasons I previously mentioned. They're the what's the word I'm looking for? They're the current national champs. And so I think that they're going to have another opportunity to at least compete for it, if not end up being in the national championship again. And then Clemson at number 4. I mean, that's where they're currently ranked at. I could see it happening just because that's what Dabo has done as a program up until this last year in 2021. They've been a constant team that's either making the playoffs or is up there in the top 5, top 6. So no bold predictions for me, honestly. Like the top 4 you got right there, I can see it.
So I'm going to bring the hot and spicy predictions in because I like being proved wrong. So number 1 team, I have Georgia being the number 1 seed. I feel like defending national champion, they have the better win as of right now between any of the top 5 teams. Number 2, I have Alabama. I feel like Alabama is just going to be one step behind Georgia after this week just because the team ranking, the team they beat. Oregon, higher ranked team, Utah State from the Mountain West Division. And then you got Iowa at number 3. I feel like Iowa is going to be that dark horse that everyone says, like, hey, they could make it if some things fall. Things fall this year. They're going to shock the world.
Set me up for disappointment.
It's not
set
disappointment.
Me up for so much disappointment.
When you see Iowa's number 3, when them college football playoffs are last revealed, you're going to thank me. I mean, y'all are playing Alabama, but you're going to be like, this man knows what he's talking about. And number 4,
October 22nd, we're going into Columbus and shocking the Buckeyes. Continue.
Shocking the Buckeyes. At me if I'm wrong. And then number 4, I have FSU coming in there. They're going to beat Dabo Swinney. So I'm predicting both the Florida rivals against each other, then Alabama versus Iowa coming out. There's the only double conference is the SEC this year. Pac-12, Big 12, pack your bags. Thanks for playing. Have fun in your New Year's 6 bowls. And yeah, that's the hot takes I have after week 1. And then speaking about hot takes that could possibly happen, I want to get a little bit of week 2 with key marquee matchups that you see starting off. Starting with Ash, what key markups that you see?
I mean, the key ones that we're looking at this coming week, I mean, you obviously have Alabama, Texas. That's one that I'll say for you just because you have a stronger relationship to that. The one that I'm looking at, Power 5 versus Power 5 team, is Iowa versus Iowa State, because, I mean, this is also one of those matchups that I was talking about earlier where you don't have a whole lot of the Big 12 did not play many other Power 5 conferences this week. This is one of the first opportunities to compare the Big 12 to another Power 5 conference. And, of course, it's another small local rivalry for the people in Iowa as well to just
Is that the
get a
Golden
basis
Boot?
of.
That's the Cyhawk.
Cyhawk, yep.
Oh, okay. I can't remember them rivalry trophies.
Yeah, I wish it had a better name to it, like the Corn Bowl or something, but no, it's just the Cyhawk rivalry.
So who you got in that game?
So right now the spread is currently 3.5 points favored towards Iowa. I mean, Iowa has the home field advantage. They have the more powerful defense, obviously. As long as the defense can continue playing this next week how they did this previous week, I mean, holding South Dakota State to only 3 points. I would like to think that the Big 12 has a little bit more offense than that, but I think that South Dakota State being the top-ranked FCS team that they were, that maybe Iowa could put some points up. I think a final score of 24-21 Hawkeyes would be appropriate.
I like that. Not too hot on that one. What about you, Soper?
The matchup that really sticks out to me right now is Florida. Quarterback going Will Levis and Richardson. Very spring. Not to mention a lot of implications. This could be the winner of this game. Maybe give Georgia a push later on down the season. I don't think it's going to happen that way. Who knows, man? I think it's just a football game overall. I do have Kentucky winning that one, slightly pulling away towards the end, 28-17. I think it's going to be a pretty interesting watch.
Okay. So the two marquee matchups I have, obviously, Alabama, Texas. Not going to do too much on that one because I believe Alabama's just the better team. Texas hasn't been in relevancy in about a handful of years, and Alabama does have Bryce Young coming off 5 touchdowns in the first half game. Will Anderson, arguably the best defensive player this year alone in college football. And you have these young receivers that just had a tune-up game. They're going to take that next step. I have Alabama winning 48-14. But the game I want to talk about is USC versus Stanford. And I believe, I don't have the point spread right now, but I know USC is heavily favored in that. But I believe Stanford comes in and upsets the Trojans to a 14-10 win and knocks the Pac-12 completely out of orbit for any playoff talks. Get rid of the Pac-12, please.
It's definitely possible to happen.
Oh,
Because, I mean, last year, Stanford was a team that upset Oregon right after they beat Ohio State the week prior. So, I mean, it's definitely possible. I don't know if I want to make the bold prediction to say that USC's losing to Stanford, but I definitely can see what you're talking about, where it might be a matchup where the USC's fan base kind of overlooks it, expects it to be more of a walkaway game, and then the Stanford Cardinal just keep it a little bit scarier and closer than expected.
Last 8 years, Stanford has been like that upset machine, because I remember they beat Oregon in overtime a handful of years back. They just beat Oregon last year. They beat USC before. Stanford is a college that can pull that off. And before we get off the show real
Christian
quick,
McCaffrey kicked our ass at the Rose Bowl back in 2015.
I remember that he ran from coast to coast.
I was there.
Oh.
I was at that game. The tailgate was fun. It was a cool experience going to the Rose Bowl, but the game was thumbs down.
Oh, y'all went to a bar and drank afterwards?
I wasn't old enough. Back then.
Oh, okay. And some big news actually dropped this week, and I want to get y'all's 2 opinions on, which is the 12-team college playoff expansion in 2026. Soper, how do you feel about this one?
Oh, man, I mean, I like it. It's hard not to like it. I'm a big fan of the expansion. teams, maybe just enough where you can get all 5 Power 5 in there, as well as a couple at-large teams. But I'm not gonna turn my nose up at 12 teams like some people will. I think there's gonna be upsets. Maybe not right away, but I think the formula is there for upset. Um, we'll just have to see how the committee goes about ranking it. That's a big thing. Remember, in the BCS, like when the BCS switched over to the playoff, you had teams like TCU before they moved to the Big 12, and then Boise State. They would be in the rank. They finished the final BCS ranking 3 to 4. So when we went to the 14 playoff, they were. Then you had those teams getting booted back a little bit further. Do we see a situation like that where the committee starts to re-rank the re-rank the criteria and like, okay, your teams like Houston, Cincinnati, or in your the American Athletic Conference, those teams like get pushed back even further to the line, or do they keep with the current ranking criteria and you get those teams still in that like top 7 range at the end of the season? That's my biggest question about it.
Okay. And Ash, I know we talked about this a little off camera, but I want the audience to know how you feel about this expansion personally.
So originally, I was a fan of looking for the expansion. This originally came to mind to me back in 2017, how you had Georgia and Alabama both made the playoffs, and it's thinking, well, why are 2 teams from the same conference making the playoffs if only 4 teams can make it? To me, that doesn't seem very objectively fair because, I mean, if there's only 4 teams that can make it, there's 5 conferences that are the powerful 5 conferences, Power 5. You would think that it should be 4 conference champions. I know that granted the SEC teams, normally one of them is the ones that wins the championship. But, I mean, an auto bid was the main thing that I thought was missing from the current playoff, not expansion, the current playoff standings.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a fan of bowl games, like coming from the Big Ten, talking about the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl is a big deal for us. The Pac-12, the Rose Bowl is a big deal for them. We have the auto bid where if you win their conference and you're not going to the playoffs, you go to the Rose Bowl. Part of the reason which makes it so special for it. Whereas, like, I mean, I was always a fan of the 14 playoff just because I just thought the one critique they could have made better was who they voted to get into it. Because if you're going to put the 4 best teams in the playoffs, what's to determine who the 4 best teams are if it's just a number in front of them? Whereas, like, 4 conference champions would be objective. What I like about the 12-team playoff is that they are implementing auto bids for all 5 of the conference champions and then the highest ranked group of 5 conference champions. So it's definitely introducing some auto bids in there. You may see like a team that went 8-4, weaseled their way into the conference championship, somehow weasels a win there, and now they're the 5 seed going into the playoffs for the national championship. It's gonna, I mean, I'm not saying it's gonna happen every year, but it's gonna happen every now and then, and it's gonna be a really exciting thing to see. And I mean, I was expecting an expansion to maybe 6 teams, maybe 8 teams, but 12 teams. Initially, I was thinking, why 12? But then I saw that the teams that are seeded 5 through 8 are going to get a home field game against the teams that are seeded 9 through 12. So what I'm picturing is just, what if you're that team that just barely misses the conference championship, but you had a pretty good season. You went 11-1. You went 10-2. You're sitting there. You're ranked, let's say, number 8, and you're hosting the number 9 team in a playoff at a home game. I just picture that being the absolute most insane atmosphere that you've ever seen in college football.
Oh my gosh, it's going to be like rivalry weekend all over again. My thoughts
it's
about
a team that you're going to see like in a different conference as well, because like, of course, like you have like the big names in your conference that you play every few years that everybody comes to town for, you get loud for. This is like where you could possibly be seeing, like, let's just say Texas A&M is ranked number 7 and they're hosting number 10. I don't know. Let's just say like Florida State. And it's just, you'll see these big name matchups where just people are showing up, showing out, and just getting loud and crazy.
It's going to be fun in their college town.
Imagine a team like Coastal Carolina, who already has an avid fan base, gets that like lead, that 6th berth, and they host a playoff game. The Mullets the blue turf. Like I mean, like that's what I'm hoping for this this new setup. I want to see it.
I'm here for it.
Yeah.
I'm here for it. And my thoughts and opinions on this, I feel like people are going to complain after 2-3 years because they're going to see the same 5, 6, 7 teams keep going because you know them conference bids. And 9 out of 10 times, it's going to be the same conference champions. Can we agree? Pac-12, Big 12 might be a little different, but the ACC, SEC, and Big 10 are kind of run by them four teams that kind of hold a gridlock on everything. But I do agree with you on this. Having that home game for the 6 through 8 or 5 through 8 team is going to be huge.
Money.
Oh, not even the money, just the atmosphere,
the experience of that.
Like, just imagine being a kid at that college campus because you get cheaper tickets and you just experience, like, you're like how you say Coastal Carolina facing off against an Alabama. And
oh, go ahead.
Oh, what were you saying, man?
Oh, yeah. I was picturing, like, what if you have, like, a Big Ten team? Like, you have a team up there like Minnesota. It gets really cold in Minneapolis, and then they are hosting a playoff game in December, January against, like, Miami. It's just an atmosphere they're not going to be used to, and it's going to play such a huge factor in that. I mean, I know that, like, they play, like, Boston College and stuff, but you just have, like, let's just picture any Southern team, really, that's just going up to cold Minneapolis for a football game. It's going to be tough.
That is going to be awful.
Yeah, but it's cold. You know, Boston. You know, it's cold and wet. You know, you can. You know, the air's wet. You can deal with it a little bit. But Minnesota, that's that cold.
It's
that
brick.
is a whole different beast. And I do have y'all enjoyed. Hopefully y'all did. Soper, thanks. Ash, I want you to tell my audience a little bit about your podcast, Pay Your Dues, so they can come check you out on all social media platforms.
Yeah, so my podcast, Pay Your Dues. Pretty much the premise of my podcast is it's very informal, a lot of banter. We very loosely follow the kind of conversations that people would have who are or were involved in Greek life in college. So if you're one of the boys and you are indeed about the banter, Pay Your Dues. We are on all the audio platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Also could find us on TikTok and Instagram.
Yes, sir. I did enjoy having y'all on. And always remember, open your playbook and see y'all later.